We are 3 weeks away until opening day. How are you feeling about the White Sox? I asked that question and got a bunch of responses. Lots of optimism out there since spring training started, but health will, of course, be the ultimate factor. Luis Robert Jr. and Andrew Vaughn have received a lot of local attention, but they're also getting some national buzz when it comes to breakout players in 2023. And Bob Nightingale wrote an article to essentially vindicate Tony La Russa from the disappointing 2022 season.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Sox fans, welcome to Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Sox. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search Locked On White Sox. Hey, I'm your host, Nick Morawski, a lifelong diehard Chicago White Sox fan, recording this podcast just blocks from the ballpark in beautiful Bridgeport. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTB. Locked On White Sox is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, welcome back to Locked On White Sox. Officially 3 weeks away until opening day. White Sox in Houston for a 4-game series, March 30th. Appreciate you continuing to pass along this podcast to other Sox fans in your life and get those questions and comments in for next Wednesday's mailbag. You can do that at lockedonsox@gmail.com. The Sox were taking on the Royals Wednesday night. Cease was on the mound. You were able to watch on the MLB app if you've got the MLB TV subscription. It was a later game. It was 7 p.m. And, I'm going to get into the details on the Royals game and on the White Sox against Team Columbia on Friday's episode. I was able to watch a little bit of Wednesday's game. I really just wanted to cover, how Dylan Cease did. And that was very short, unfortunately. He pitched basically a third of an inning, loaded the bases up in the bottom of the first against the Royals, could not find the zone at all with breaking ball or really any other pitch. He had 3 straight walks at one point, walked a runner in. He did have one nice 12-6 curveball. That was about it. After walking in a run, then he gave up a grand slam. He was taken out of the game with 1 out in the first inning through roughly 22, 23 pitches, something like that. Not at all what he wanted. Pedro Grifol was looking for some mistakes. And you know what? He got it. It's a laboratory. Spring training, even for pitchers. Dylan Cease trying some things out. The breaking stuff not always working out in Arizona. So you never know. That could have been the case. But we'll go into some details on Friday's episode on that Royals-Sox game. So we got 3 weeks until opening day. How are you feeling about the Sox? I'm sure you've had these conversations with other Sox fans in your life, friends, family, coworkers. You feeling better or worse since spring training started? Maybe, you're feeling exactly the same. I tend to have a lot of conversations with myself when doing a solo podcast. I'll ask the question, then answer. But I got some input from Sox fans on Twitter. I asked how fans were feeling, and I got a few dozen responses, and a majority were indeed positive. A few pessimistic fans still out there, and a handful that were indifferent. It was a quick straw poll, but I thought the results were pretty telling. So I'll start with the optimistic, these optimistic fans first. Several different blurbs but you'll find a common theme in these. Elvis Andrus is talked about quite a bit when it comes to how fans are feeling, especially when it comes to their optimism. very good. It's a talented group. One fan wrote, now they have a proper manager and staff that understands baseball in 2023. Of course, health matters the most. Benintendi and Elvis were good pickups. Elvis Andrus talked about a bit. Fan said, better until further notice. Like Steve Stone says, I'm going to enjoy the ride. Better. I like watching Elvis Andrus play second. Makes me feel better. Also, Colossus is ready for the big leagues. Rotation depth is there. Was there where a couple of weeks ago it was in limbo. Just need these guys to stay healthy. Healthy, of course, another thread. Better, feeling good about Elvis Andrus and Colas. Again, multiple people, turning their, I guess, optimism to the fact that Elvis Andrus was brought back with the White Sox. Another fan wrote, I feel very confident in this team, actually much more confident in this team than I was in last year's. I like the vibes coming out of camp. That's something you're hearing quite a bit in different articles that you might read since spring training started. Optimistic about winning the Central, not so much beyond that. It's going to have to be the guys in camp who beat Houston in October. They've shown no reason to believe they can, and we know aggressive moves will not be made. I thought that was an interesting comment by a fan on social media, because it essentially, is true. Like we have not seen a real track record of the White Sox, especially at the trade deadline, going out and going for broke. Now, you can make an argument with Craig Kimbrell. You really can. But, I feel like that big missing piece, we kind of had the bullpen. Craig Kimbrell was one of the best arms available. And I know that was a very Tony La Russa thing to stock the bullpen, but getting a dynamic starting pitcher, to go down the stretch, I'd love to see that if the Sox had the opportunity at the trade deadline. So this fan's point is, look, whoever's in camp right now, that's probably who we're going to have to deal with. We'll see. I'd love to be in that situation come trade deadline, where things are looking really good for the White Sox, and they just need, maybe one more big time starter for that playoff stretch. Better, cautiously optimistic. Yohan and Luis's starts haven't been ideal. I agree with that. But I've liked what Yaz, Elvis, and some of the other guys have brought so far. Good to see Yasmani Grandal get a lot of games back there behind home plate. Legs have got to be feeling a world of difference from last year. And again, another positive comment for Elvis. Another fan wrote, optimistic, lots of players with something personally to prove. Again, that's another thing to focus on. Some with contracts, some just simply last year was garbage, and they know it. And they desperately, want to put something better out there for themselves, for this team. I think that's a good point. Better, Elvis and Billy being on the opening day roster would make me happy. Colas looks very good, praying for health and productivity. Yeah, players to reach their potential and to stay healthy. I don't know about Billy Hamilton if he's going to make that opening day roster. He definitely brings the speed. He brings the culture and morale, and he can play defense. But I'm wondering what kind of bat they're looking for when they might get, out of a Romy Gonzalez or Hanser Alberto. Like, we'll see. Another fan wrote, better with Elvis. Another Elvis. So many times, Elvis has been the focus. Tons of talent. Let's see if Grifol can help these guys remove their heads from where at the plate this year. Plate discipline. That has been something that has been focused on in the offseason between Jose Castro and Mike Tosar. Grifol has talked about it. We did not see plate discipline last year, especially from a few players like Luis Robert, for example. So I too am looking for some plate discipline. Have a plan when you get up there and be able to be patient with that at bat. Not as much guessing. Another fan wrote, much better. Their energy and intensity seem to be back to pre-Tony levels. We're going to talk Tony La Russa later in this episode too. I agree with the energy and intensity, and players are talking about it. You are getting quotes about that. that it is a much different camp. And here's another one. Can't put too much stock in spring, but people are overly negative. This team is playing differently, hustling, and relatively healthy. Elvis is a bigger pickup than people think. I'm feeling cautiously better. So the vibe, most of the folks that responded to this quick little straw poll I did on Twitter are feeling better than how they were maybe in January, maybe in early February. Elvis was signed kind of right before camp had started, and he seems to be a focal point. And Colas is mentioned quite a bit, and we've covered Grifol and will again in this episode, because the more, again, he says, the better I feel. Pessimistic, hey, you got to fan the way, you only know how. No wrong answers with this straw poll. And essentially, just a few pessimistic answers that, I received. The essence is, at the end of the day, the same people are in charge. And, I agree with that. I really do. I truly believe that, this team, the organization itself, isn't going to be any different unless the ownership changes and a lot of the front office changes. However, with the manager they put in place, and allowing him to, for the most part, choose his coaching staff, and you figure out and read about the people that he's set himself up around, it just feels different. I mean, it's got to be different, right? I mean, it can't be as bad as last year. That's the thing that I keep, repeating to myself. Of course it can. I mean, anything can happen. Look at last year. But everything that I'm hearing from the players and reading about Grifol, despite the fact that we have the same owner and essentially the same front office, I think things can be different this year. And there are some folks that are still just on the fence, which I truly, I appreciate. I get that. Nothing that happens in spring is going to sway my opinion. And if we've learned anything from the past, talk is just that. Another fan wrote, I want to be optimistic, but been hurt too many times. Got to see when it matters. And it's only April is not a good enough reason if they are playing bad. I really like that. I agree with that statement. That cannot be an excuse anymore. And that's not how this team right now is being built. This team is being built to be urgent right now, attack right now. Don't get complacent. So, I think you can tell actually a lot from spring training. Maybe not the things, all the things, because we only can see so many games on television or, listen on the radio or what have you. But, I do believe the overall vibes and attitude is important, and it just feels different right now. The foundation for this long season is currently being built. Last year, it didn't seem like it was ever built right. This year seems to be so different. About 3 weeks to go, of course, and roughly 20 spring training games left. I'm feeling much better than I was on February 1st. Grifol seems to have put in place what he talked about in the offseason, and players appear to be responding well. Bringing back Elvis was huge, but a successful season will ultimately hinge on keeping our core guys on the field. I think the urgency element is already there. Sox fans know how special Luis Robert can be if he's healthy. And we also have excitement, of course, for Andrew Vaughn's potential. Those two players are also getting national attention as well. More on that in a moment. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on anything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Couple articles that I was going over, that I missed and I didn't get to talk too much about. That were happening when I was in Arizona. This one was in the Athletic last week, and it was about breakout players and 10 MLB. 10, only 10 MLB breakout predictions for 2023. This was Jim Bowden's hitters and pitchers to watch. 2 of the 10 players are members of the Chicago White Sox. Interesting read here. Start with Luis Robert Jr. This is what Bowden had to say. I'm much higher on Luis Robert Jr. than most analysts based on their rankings and discussions I've had with evaluators throughout the game. Bottom line, I like his hit tool and defense better than most. Robert has to live up to my lofty expectations, but last year that had more to do with injuries, including trying to play through pain in his left wrist and hand. What I like about Luis Robert is that he hits all types of pitches. He's a 300 plus hitter against the fastball, but he's also proven he can hit all the secondary pitches. In fact, he hit more home runs against breaking balls last year than fastballs, and he hit more than 400 against off-speed pitches. He also has the skills to develop into a well above average defensive center fielder. As a rookie, he won the Gold Glove Award in the shortened 2020 season and then had 2 subpar defensive years, according to the scouts and the metrics. However, he has the talent and athleticism to be a special outfielder. Offensively, I believe he will break out this year with 25 to 30 home runs and at least 30 stolen bases, thanks in part to the rule changes that encourage running. So get ready for the Robert Show. It's coming to the south side of Chicago this year if he can stay healthy, of course. So really, my question is, can Luis Robert practice discipline at the plate and refrain from chasing pitches? That's going to be huge. He had a double in Cuba's first World Baseball Classic game, but he also looked lost swinging at pitches he had no business swinging at. Maybe a little too aggressive, a little too quick to impress, but he's got to be more selective. And how about Andrew Vaughn? Andrew Vaughn, the third player selected in the 2019 MLB draft, has been blocked on the White Sox at first base, where team leader Jose Abreu was stationed for 9 years. However, Chicago let Abreu walk in free agency to clear the way for Vaughn after making him play the outfield corners and designated hitter most of the time over his first 2 years in the majors. Now that he's at first base, he can concentrate on doing what he does best, hit with power. He turns 25 years old in April, and I can't wait to see what he does this season. I think his home run total will swell from 17 last year to 22 to 24 this year, and his on-base percentage will be much higher, closer to what he did in the minors, perhaps even reaching the 350 range. The plan for Andrew Vaughn was put in play a long time ago, of course, when he was initially drafted. I think Jose Abreu's 3-year contract extension after the 2019 season might not have been a unanimous decision throughout the front office. Hahn and Kenny might have assumed one direction, and Jerry went in a different one. Andrew Vaughn is here, and it's his time. Who's to blame for the 2022 season? Well, Bob Nightingale seemed to paint a picture that cleared Tony La Russa of all wrongdoing. More on that in a moment. Before we get to the Bob Nightingale article, also wanted to comment on something I saw from Codify. If you're not familiar with Codify, I became aware of it when Liam Hendriks was first signed with the White Sox in January 2021. And it's this program that I'll just give you kind of the skim here. It's a program that Hendriks was using that essentially creates heat maps for hitters that he's going to face. He knows where they're ice cold and where they are hot, and has a good sense, how to develop a plan on how to pitch them. And he would go over these maps and this program in the bullpen. And I'm really intrigued with what Codify puts out on Twitter. And they were talking about essentially this change in baseball with pitchers will now be kind of calling their own pitches with pitch comp. Typically we have seen pitchers with that little device in their hat, and they are listening to what the catcher dials up. With the pitch clock this year, pitchers that have an array of different pitches, we don't have time to rifle through everything that I potentially can throw. I'm going to call my own pitches with the device. And I've seen some pitchers like Zach Greinke use it this spring, and it's just attached to their belt. So I thought that was a little interesting, something to monitor moving forward in spring training, and what the White Sox might able to use and how they can use that this coming season. So Bob Nightingale, he covers the MLB for USA Today, and he felt the need to write an article about the 2022 White Sox. To be fair, he did, talk a little bit about this spring training and what to expect in 2023. My question is, who asked Bob Nightingale to write this article vindicating Tony La Russa of the 2022 season? I've joked around, I really think that he is a White Sox whisperer. I think Jerry Reinsdorf gets into his ear, or other folks in the White Sox organization, and they kind of push him a little bit to be kind to ownership and to the front office. Well, he wrote this just recently. White Sox players take blame for disappointing 2022 season, out to prove it was an aberration. So Nightingale wrote, TLR can no longer be blamed. The White Sox players, after spending the winter looking at themselves in the mirror, will tell you it was their fault for their embarrassing season for a year ago. The White Sox arrived into camp with an American League Central-sized chip on their shoulder, completely embarrassed over perhaps their most disappointing season in nearly 40 years. Nightingale quoted a few players, not many. Joe Kelly was one of them. This is what Kelly had to say. Nobody was taking accountability. It was easy for the fans to say it was Tony's fault. It was easy for the writers to say it was Tony's fault. It was easy for other teams from afar to say it was Tony. It didn't matter who was managing. We didn't play hard enough. We didn't focus enough. We embarrassed ourselves. It was our fault from the get-go. It was our fault for not playing with such urgency. It was our fault for not holding each other accountable. It was too late when we decided to get going. We had a lot of guys get injured, but everyone gets injured. We kind of slow played actual baseball. And once we got back into game speed, we played like we were still rehabbing as a unit. Wow. Nightingale wrote, the White Sox had 10 players on the injured list in late June. Kelly went on here. Guys were taking it easy, being cautious, and that was not coming from the training staff or strength coach. It was us as players not going pedal to the metal. We were running out of time, and then we kind of speeded as fast as we could, but then obviously we couldn't catch up. Usually when you finish 500, you're not winners or you're not losers, but as good as our talent was, that's losing. Nightingale wrote, it was clear to veterans like Lance Lynn, who played for La Russa in St. Louis, that La Russa was not himself most of the year. He had little energy. He needed daily naps. His voice was so soft that it was often hard to hear him. This was not the La Russa anyone knew. I love Tony to death, Lance Lynn said, and you could tell he wasn't 100% of what he wanted to be. We knew Tony was going through a lot and tried to be there for him. But you know Tony. He wasn't going to let us know what was going on. He told us about the heart stuff, but there was more, way more stuff going on. He still won't tell anybody. So you got to fast forward now to the 4-month plus Grifol era, and was his focus and what his focus has been this spring, of course. And this is Grifol talking about what has been happening so far in Glendale, Arizona. I wanted to work hard. I wanted energy. I wanted attention to detail. And that's just not for the players, but for the coaches, and myself included. And here's Joe Kelly again. There's such a big difference. This is the most intense spring I've been a part of in 5 seasons. It's been like go, go, go. I didn't see that many guys run that hard in spring training last year, and now you see them working on their base running, sprinting, and all these crazy drills. This was Tim Anderson. We're trying to create something different, block out the distractions, block out the noise, take care of business, and we will be ready for a lot of fun. No excuses. And that is how the article ends. So players mentioned, of course, Tim Anderson, Lance Lynn, and Kelly. So my question after reading it, and I appreciate Joe Kelly trying to cover for Tony La Russa, but who was holding players accountable last year? Why was it players trying to hold each other accountable? Why wasn't it a manager and a coaching staff, trying to facilitate the apparent chaos? Who was making sure players were not complacent? I mean, wouldn't that have been a message heading right into spring training? Look, we won the division in 2021, but we also got absolutely bounced and embarrassed by the Houston Astros in the postseason. All right. We are trying to run it back here, not just to win the division, but to win a World Series. It sounded like TLR was simply not up to the task physically and just did not have the energy to hold players to a high standard. So again, when we talk about holding players to a standard, I mean, that's what we're essentially talking about now with Pedro Grifol and how he's been running his camp with his coaching staff and, talking to players in the offseason. What do you want to see different? What can I do to set you up for success? So I do believe a manager plays a role. I get what Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly were saying in this USA Today article. Like, players have to play. We have to perform. Okay, but where is the manager? Where is the coaching staff, that's stepping in, that's trying to right the ship? It clearly was not there. And interesting stuff from Lance Lynn about where TLR was physically throughout the season. So hopefully better days for the Chicago White Sox team under Pedro Grifol and his coaching staff. Folks, thank you so very much for making this podcast part of your daily routine. You can find the Locked On White Sox podcast absolutely everywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Twitter at Locked On Sox. You can find me on Twitter at Nick_GGTB. Hey, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and get those questions in for next week's mailbag at lockedonsox@gmail.com. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. Find Locked On Fantasy Baseball everywhere you find your podcasts, and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the next episode, I'll get into more depth on that Sox-Royals game, as well as how they fared against Team Columbia. Really appreciate you making time for the Locked On White Sox podcast. I'm Nick Morawski. Until next time, go Sox.